She had been cleaning rooms in that hotel for 6 years. 6 years of bleach-burned hands, aching feet, and a smile she wore like armor every single morning. 6 years of being invisible to the people whose beds she made, whose floors she scrubbed, whose mess she quietly disappeared. Nobody knew her name. Nobody needed to. But on a Tuesday afternoon in late July, in a conference room on the fourth floor of the Prescott Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago, her son walked through a door he was never supposed to open. He was 11 years old. He was wearing a faded green hoodie. He was holding a plastic lunchbox. And the moment he stepped into that room, a woman in heels stood up so fast her chair scraped against the marble floor like a gunshot. Get that child out of here right now. This is a $200 million negotiation, not a field trip. He's just bringing his mother her lunch, someone said softly near the door. I don't care what he's doing. He doesn't belong in this room. He doesn't belong on this floor. The boy's mother, a black woman in a gray uniform with a name tag that read Carol, stepped forward immediately, her eyes dropping to the floor the way they always did when people spoke about her like she wasn't in the room. She reached for her son's arm. She whispered his name. She started pulling him toward the service entrance. Every executive at that table watched. Not one of them said a word. But the boy didn't move. He looked past the woman screaming, past the hotel manager already moving toward him, past his mother's whispered warning. He looked straight to the head of the table, straight into the eyes of the CEO who had not yet bothered to look up from his papers. And in a voice that was steady and clear and louder than an 11-year-old had any right to be, he said 4 words. Your translator is lying. The room went completely, absolutely silent. And what that boy did in the next 48 minutes would end a man's 20-year career, save $31 million, and leave one of the most powerful executives in the country staring at a beat-up dictionary with his mouth open. Before we go further, take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and tell me where you're watching from. It truly means a lot to see how far these stories connect with people around the world. Her name was Carol Watkins, 43 years old, single mother, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. She left the apartment before her son woke up and came home after he was already asleep. That was just life. That was just how the math worked when you were raising a child on a housekeeper's wage in one of the most expensive cities in the country. She never complained. Not to her coworkers, not to her supervisors, and certainly not to the guests who walked past her without acknowledgement, who left rooms that looked like small tornadoes had passed through, who occasionally left $1 on the nightstand like they were doing her a favor. Carol Watkins carried all of it without flinching, because she had a son, and that son needed to eat, needed shoes, needed a future that looked nothing like her present. His name was Darius, and he was not what people expected. He was quiet in the way still water is quiet, not empty, but deep. He had his mother's serious eyes and a mind that worked in ways his teachers struggled to describe. Not gifted in the way schools measure giftedness, no fancy test scores, no early placement programs. Gifted in a way that had nothing to do with opportunity and everything to do with hunger. Because Darius had grown up hungry, not for food, for connection. While his mother worked, he was alone. The apartment walls were thin and the building was full. Full of people who spoke Spanish in the stairwell, Haitian Creole in the laundry room, Polish in the parking lot, Vietnamese through the window of apartment 4C. Languages floated through that building like music. And Darius, alone and quiet and curious, absorbed every note. He was 6 when the elderly Dominican woman across the hall started teaching him Spanish in exchange for carrying her groceries. By 7, they argued about telenovela plots in rapid-fire Castilian. By 8, he had found a YouTube channel about the history of the Berlin Wall, all in German, and he watched it the way other kids watch cartoons, twice, 3 times, 4 times, pausing to mimic the sounds until they lived in his mouth comfortably. French came from the public library. Mandarin came from the man who ran the dumpling shop 2 blocks away, who made a deal with Darius. Sweep the floor every evening, and I will teach you. Darius never missed a single day for 11 months. He didn't learn languages the way people learn in classrooms, with workbooks and vocabulary tests and gold stars. He learned them the way you learn the layout of a dark room, slowly, carefully, by feel, by listening, by repeating, by caring so much about the sound of another person's voice that you memorized it until it became your own. 7 languages by the age of 11. Still working on Latin. The most important object in his life was a German-English dictionary held together with a rubber band. His mother had bought it from a thrift store for $3, saved from tips over 3 weeks. The cover was peeling when she brought it home. She opened to the inside cover and wrote in blue ink, "Words are doors. Open every one. Love, Mom." The ink had smudged on the word every because she'd written it late at night, after a double shift, her hand unsteady with exhaustion. She pressed on anyway. Darius never replaced that dictionary. He couldn't. A new one wouldn't have her handwriting in it. Carol had never heard her son speak German. She didn't know he could. She was about to find out in the worst possible way. It started 2 days before everything fell apart. The Prescott Grand was hosting what management kept calling the deal of the decade. A Chicago-based development and infrastructure firm called Callaway Partners was finalizing a joint venture with a German engineering conglomerate. $200 million on the table. Months of negotiation. Attorneys flown in from 3 states. The kind of meeting that closed down an entire floor. The translator was a man named Frederick Hale. Smooth. Polished. Mid-50s, silver cuffs, a confidence that came from 2 decades of making himself indispensable to people who couldn't speak each other's languages. He had translated for Callaway Partners for 8 years. Marcus Callaway, the CEO, trusted him completely. Implicitly. Without question. That was the problem. Carol had been assigned to clean the 4th-floor hallway during the conference's 2nd day. Darius was with her, summer break. No camp, no sitter, no options. He sat in a folding chair near the service cart with his headphones in, dictionary on his knee, listening to a German-language podcast about the architecture of medieval cathedrals. Invisible. The way staff kids always learn to be. Around midday, Carol was called to refresh linens in a suite at the far end of the hall. She told Darius to stay put and left the cart where it was. Simple enough. But as Carol turned the corner, a door at the end of the hallway, the main conference room, swung open by a few inches. Just a few. A draft from the service stairwell caught it. And through that gap, Darius heard something that made him pull his headphones out. 2 voices. A man speaking in German, deep and measured, clearly laying out a position with some force. And then the translator's voice, smooth, conversational, almost breezy, rendering it into English. Darius sat very still, because the English did not match the German. Not even close. The German voice, which Darius would later learn belonged to the lead German executive, a man named Werner Bauer, had said clearly, in the formal register of someone who has been pushed as far as he intends to go, "We will not proceed without a fully independent third-party audit of the liability projections." This is not a point of negotiation. What Frederick Hale told the room in English was, he says they're open to revisiting the audit structure after the initial signing. Darius's entire body went cold. Then it happened in the other direction. Marcus Callaway said something about the penalty clause being subject to revision based on project milestones. Frederick turned to the German delegation and told them, in German, that Callaway had agreed to the fixed penalty structure as originally proposed. Darius pressed himself against the wall. His chest felt tight. His mind was running calculations it didn't have words for yet. He wasn't watching a mistake. You don't accidentally translate, "We will not proceed," as "they're open to revisiting." You don't accidentally reverse the meaning of a penalty clause. Not once. Not twice. Frederick Hale was not a bad translator. He was a brilliant one. Brilliant enough to reshape every sentence in both directions simultaneously, to give each side exactly what they wanted to hear, to create a fiction of agreement so convincing that 2 rooms full of lawyers and executives had spent 2 days nodding at each other while never once saying the same thing. And somewhere in that fiction, in the space between what was said and what was heard, there was money. A lot of it. Darius heard his mother call his name from down the hall. He grabbed the cart handle, lowered his head, and walked. That night, in their apartment, while Carol slept on the couch still in her uniform, Darius sat at the kitchen table in the low light of the stove hood. He opened the dictionary to the back pages, the blank ones, and took out a pencil. He drew 2 columns. On the left, what Werner Bauer had actually said. On the right, what Frederick Hale had told the room. Line by line, sentence by sentence, everything he could remember, written out in his careful, slightly uneven 11-year-old handwriting. He wrapped the rubber band around the dictionary. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. He was 11 years old. He had no idea what to do with what he knew, but he knew he couldn't unknow it. Ask yourself this. If you were 11 years old, sitting in that kitchen, knowing what Darius knew, would you have been brave enough to do what he did next? Keep watching, because this story is just getting started. The next morning, Darius was back in the hotel basement. The staff break room at the Prescott Grand was the kind of space that existed for the people the hotel needed, but didn't particularly want guests to see. Fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency that lived just inside your skull. Plastic chairs around a folding table. A coffee maker that always smelled like it was one cup away from catching fire. A window that looked directly at the side of the dishwashing unit, perpetually fogged with steam. Darius sat in the corner with his headphones on and his dictionary on his knee. Invisible in the way that staff kids learn to be invisible, not hiding, just not quite registering. A piece of furniture that happened to breathe. The head chef walked in. His name was Pascal, a Frenchman from Lyon who had been cooking in American hotels for 20 years and complained about it daily. He was on his phone, arguing in rapid French with a supplier about a delivery. Something about an invoice. Wrong dates, wrong quantities. His voice was climbing. Darius didn't look up. He just said, quietly, in French, "Tell him to check line 4. The delivery date reads the 3rd. It should be the 13th. The digit was transposed." Pascal stopped mid-sentence. He stared at the boy in the corner like he had just watched the ceiling open up and speak. He asked Darius a question in French. Not simple French, fast, idiomatic, lion-flavored French. Darius answered without hesitating. No accent anyone could place. Just fluent, comfortable, at-home French. Pascal switched to Creole on instinct, testing him. Darius followed without missing a breath. By now, a few other staff members had drifted in for their break. A dishwasher from Lisbon asked Darius something in Portuguese. He answered her, and then told her, in Portuguese, that his favorite word in the language was saudade, a kind of longing that had no real equivalent in English, and that he had spent a week once trying to find the closest translation before giving up. She put her hand over her heart. Someone called the Italian guard from the hallway. "Try him in Italian." He did. Darius answered. A waitress from Guadalajara leaned in and tried Spanish. Darius responded, and she laughed out loud, not from surprise, but from the sheer delight of hearing her home dialect coming out of an 11-year-old boy in a Chicago hotel basement. 5 languages. Back to back. No effort visible. Like a musician who doesn't think about the notes anymore. The instrument just plays. "How many do you speak?" Someone asked. 7. Still working on Latin. He said it without pride. The way you say I have 2 eggs left in the fridge. Just a fact. The room had changed without anyone deciding it should. A dozen people in aprons and uniforms were standing around a boy in a hoodie, some shaking their heads, some just staring. The dishwasher from Lisbon had gone quiet in a way that meant she was moved. Pascal was still on his phone, but had stopped pacing. None of these people were the kind of people the world handed microphones to. They were the invisible ones, the same world the boy himself belonged to. And watching him do something miraculous that no one had asked him to do, in a room no one would ever see. Something about that felt both beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. When the crowd thinned, Darius sat down next to Pascal, who was still looking at him like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Can I ask you something?" Darius said. "Anything. If you knew someone was lying, really lying, about something big, but nobody would believe you, because of who you are, would you still say something?" Pascal was quiet for a moment. He set his phone down on the table. He looked at the boy. "If it matters? Yes. Say it anyway. Even if they laugh. Even if they don't believe you. Say it anyway. Because the truth doesn't care who's carrying it." Darius nodded. He opened the dictionary to the back pages and placed it on the table. Pascal looked down and saw the 2 columns. German on the left. English on the right. What is this? What someone said, and what someone else told everyone he said. Pascal frowned. He could read enough of the German to sense the shape of it. These don't match. No, not even close. Darius closed the dictionary, slid it back into his hoodie pocket, stood up. Pascal watched him. "What are you going to do?" The boy didn't answer. He walked out of the break room, past the kitchen, past the loading dock, up the service stairs, toward the 4th floor. The 4th floor smelled like a different planet. Darius noticed it immediately as he pushed through the service door. The air was warmer, somehow stiller, filtered through something expensive. Polished wood paneling. Fresh flowers on narrow tables every 20 feet. Carpet so thick his sneakers disappeared into it without a sound. The kind of hallway that existed to make people feel like the world was under control. He did not belong here. Every signal this floor sent said so. He was carrying his mother's lunchbox. She had forgotten it in the staff locker that morning and asked him, over a text message between shifts, to bring it up. Simple. Quick. Come up, drop it off, go back down. He hadn't planned anything else. Not really. But as he walked past the conference room with its floor-to-ceiling glass walls, he slowed without meaning to. Because through the glass he could see them. Two groups of people arranged on opposite sides of a long mahogany table, suits and leather folders and pins that cost more than his mother's weekly paycheck. And in the middle, Frederick Hale, relaxed and confident, a slight smile on his face, the very image of a man who knew he was essential. Darius stopped. He could hear through the gap in the door. Not clearly, just enough. And enough was all it took. Werner Bauer, the German lead, was speaking in a tone that had sharpened. The kind of tone that means patience is almost gone. He said, in German, that the liability terms as currently written placed an unacceptable level of risk entirely on the German side, and that his company required substantive changes before any document was signed. He said this with the flat certainty of someone who means exactly every word and expects to be heard. Frederick turned to Marcus Calloway with the expression of a man delivering good news. He says their team is largely satisfied with the current terms and looks forward to wrapping up the remaining details. Darius's stomach dropped so hard he put a hand against the wall to steady himself. Largely satisfied. Largely satisfied was not the terms are unacceptable and we need substantive changes. Those two sentences did not occupy the same universe. And yet Frederick Hale had said one while hearing the other, without his voice so much as flickering. Calloway nodded, made a note, leaned back in his chair with the body language of a man on the verge of the finish line. Then Calloway spoke, something about maintaining flexibility in the dispute resolution timeline, given the cross-border complexity of the project. Reasonable. Measured. Frederick turned to the German delegation and told them, in German, that Calloway had fully accepted the fixed dispute timeline as proposed by their legal team and had no further reservations. Darius stood very still. He understood now, not as a theory but as a certainty, what was happening in that room. Frederick Hale was not translating. He was conducting. He was playing both sides like instruments, drawing them toward a signature on a document that neither party had actually agreed to, while somewhere, in accounts they would never see, the difference was collecting interest. Darius thought about the dictionary in his pocket, the columns he'd written in pencil. He thought about his mother in her gray uniform, eyes down, apologizing for her own existence in a hallway where no one had even learned her name. He thought about what Pascal had said. Say it anyway. The truth doesn't care who's carrying it. And he thought, if not me, who? There was no one else in the world who understood both languages in that room. No one except a boy in a hoodie holding a lunchbox on a floor he wasn't supposed to be on. He set the lunchbox carefully on the floor beside the wall. He put his hand on the door. I want to stop here for 1 second, because this next moment, this is the part that will make you feel something you weren't expecting. Stay right there. He pushed the door open. Every head in that room turned. For a moment no one spoke. It was the kind of silence that comes from collective confusion, the room's brain trying to compute something it hadn't prepared for. An 11-year-old black boy in a hoodie, standing in the doorway of a $400 an hour conference room, looking like he had every right in the world to be there. Then the room's brain caught up, and a woman named Sandra Price, the hotel's director of executive events, a woman whose entire career was built on the invisible architecture of these gatherings, was out of her chair in less than 3 seconds. How did he get up here? Who was responsible for? She turned to the door. Security. Now. She grabbed Darius by the shoulder. Not gentle. Not the grip of someone who thought he was a child. The grip of someone removing an obstacle. This is the cleaning woman's son. I am so sorry. I will have him out immediately. Frederick Hale leaned back in his leather chair. His smirk arrived before his words did. Well, this is what happens when the staff entrance doesn't have a proper lock. He let the sentence sit in the room, then added, maybe someone can find the boy a mop. Give him something productive to do. A few people around the table exhaled in that way that wasn't quite laughter, but wanted to be. Calloway's son, who functioned as the company's VP and who had not looked up from his phone since Darius entered, muttered something toward his screen that ended with "Just get him out." Darius stood in the center of it, 11 years old, surrounded by people in suits, being discussed in the third person, like a misplaced object that needed to be returned to its proper shelf. He did not leave. He shook Sandra Price's hand off his shoulder, one deliberate step forward, and he looked at Marcus Calloway, not at the smirking translator, not at the woman already reaching for his arm again, the man at the head of the table, the decision-maker. For words, calm, clear, loud enough for every person in the room to hear. Your translator is lying. The quality of the silence that followed was different from the first one. The first silence was confusion. This one was something older and colder. This was the silence of a room that had heard something it couldn't unhear. Frederick was on his feet before the echo died. "Excuse me." His voice came out controlled, but the smirk was gone. "You want to repeat that?" Darius didn't look at him. He turned to the German delegation, specifically to Werner Bauer, who was watching the boy with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and fierce attention. And Darius spoke in German. Not school German. Not textbook German. The careful, precise German of someone who has spent years listening to how real people construct real sentences. Steady, grammatically tight, formally respectful of the register the room demanded. He told Werner Bauer, in his own language, that the translator had just told the American CEO that the German side was largely satisfied with the current liability terms. He asked Werner Bauer if that was what he had said. He explained what Werner had actually said, word for word, including the part about unacceptable risk distribution and the requirement for substantive changes before any signature. Every German executive at that table went completely still. Werner Bauer's expression shifted, the way a face shifts when shock transitions into recognition. He looked at Darius for a long moment. Then he looked at Frederick Hale. And the look he gave Frederick was not angry. It was colder than anger. It was the look of a man reordering his understanding of the past 2 days. Darius turned back to the American side of the table. "He just told you he's satisfied." "He isn't. He said the liability terms put an unacceptable risk entirely on his company, and that he needs substantial changes before anything gets signed." He paused. "And when Mr. Calloway talked about keeping the dispute resolution timeline flexible, your translator told the German side that Mr. Calloway had already fully accepted their fixed timeline proposal." "That's not what he said either." He pointed at Frederick Hale. "Every sentence that's gone through him has come out different on the other side. Not a little different. The opposite. The Germans think they've been negotiating one deal. You think you've been negotiating another deal. This whole room has been having a conversation with one person." His finger stayed level, pointed at the translator. "And that person has been talking to himself." Frederick's hand came down on the table. "This is completely absurd. You're going to take the word of a child, an 11-year-old who wandered in off a service stairwell, over a certified professional with 20 years of industry experience." He turned to Calloway. "Marcus, come on. This is insulting." Marcus Calloway had not spoken. He had not moved. He was looking at Darius, then at Werner Bauer, then back at Darius. And his face was doing something that had nothing to do with anger or embarrassment. It was going white with a specific kind of realization. The realization of a man who has just felt the ground shift under his feet and is calculating, very rapidly, how long it might have been moving without him knowing. Because if Darius was right, and the German executive's face said he was right, then this wasn't just about today. Frederick Hale had been translating for Calloway Partners for 8 years. 8 years of contracts, meetings, negotiations. 8 years in which Marcus Calloway had no way of knowing what was real. Darius reached into his hoodie pocket. He pulled out the dictionary, opened it to the back. 2 columns, pencil, German on the left, English on the right. His handwriting, careful and slightly uneven, the handwriting of a kid who had taught himself to write in 6 different scripts. "I wrote it down," he said. "Both days. Everything I heard him change." He placed the dictionary on the table. Werner Bauer reached for it before anyone else moved. He read the German column, line by line, jaw tight, not speaking. Then he set the dictionary down and looked directly at Marcus Calloway and said, in the careful, broken English he reserved for moments when he wanted no middleman, "The boy is correct." The room held its breath. Marcus Calloway stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked around the table. at the lawyers, at the executives, at the translator whose smirk had permanently vacated his face, and said, with the deliberate calm of a man who is not calm at all, "We'll take 30 minutes. Everyone stays." Then he looked over his shoulder. "You, come with me." Darius followed him into the hallway. The fourth floor was empty and quiet. The air conditioning hummed in the walls. Late afternoon light came through a window at the end of the hall in wide, flat strips across the carpet, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's being documented. Like it matters. Marcus Calloway stopped near the window. He was 61 years old. He had served in the military before building his company from the ground up, 25 employees to 1,200, negotiations on 4 continents. He was not a man who kneeled easily. He got down on one knee, right there on the hallway carpet. In a suit that cost more than Carol Watkins made in a month, he lowered himself to eye level with an 11-year-old boy. "What's your name?" "Darius Watkins, sir." "Darius, how many languages do you speak?" "7. Still working on Latin." Calloway looked at him for a long time with the expression of a man looking at something he does not yet have the right category for. Not amusement, not condescension. Something closer to the look you give someone who has just, inexplicably, saved your life. "Can you read German? Legal German? Written contracts?" "Yes, sir." Calloway pulled out his phone, opened a document, the full German version of the joint venture agreement, 14 pages of dense legal text. He scrolled to a section near the end and held the screen out. "Tell me what this says." Darius read it, slowly at first, then building speed as the structure became familiar. His eyes moved across the language the way someone moves through a room they've lived in a long time. This clause sets the financial penalty for missing the first project milestone at $18 million. Fixed. Non-negotiable. If Mr. Hale translated it the way he translated everything else, you probably heard a much lower number. Or a negotiable one. Calloway closed his eyes for 3 seconds. The kind of pause a person takes when the full shape of something bad becomes clear all at once. He stood up and made a phone call. Then 2 more. Within 25 minutes, 3 independent attorneys, 1 German speaker, 2 bilingual contract specialists, were in a hotel suite with the full agreement spread across the bed. Both language versions side by side, clause by clause. The results took less than an hour. 8 material alterations across 3 sessions of negotiation. Hidden consulting provisions routed through a third-party account. Penalty thresholds that were dramatically different in German versus English. Profit-sharing ratios that had been quietly adjusted in the middle of translation. Every change, in every case, created a gap. And every gap flowed in the same direction. Into a private account registered to Frederick Hale. Estimated total damage, had the contract been executed as written, $31 million. Calloway came back to the hallway where Darius was waiting, dictionary still in his hand, the rubber band slightly loose from being opened too many times in one day. He leaned against the wall with the flat, exhausted posture of a man who has just been told the foundation of his house has been hollow for 8 years. "How old are you?" 11, sir." He nodded once, slowly, looking at the ceiling. Then he straightened his tie, walked back into the conference room, and looked at Frederick Hale, who was still in his chair, still holding his coffee, still performing the confidence of a man who doesn't yet know the game is over. Frederick looked up with the practiced smile of someone who has survived rooms like this before. "Marcus, look, I think if we address the disruption and move forward, the Germans are actually quite close to." "Frederick, 1 word. That was all." The smile died. "You're terminated. Effective immediately. Legal will contact you before close of business today." Frederick stood up, so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. "On what basis?" "The word of a child? An 11-year-old who walked in off the street." "On the basis of 3 independent attorneys who just reviewed every clause you translated across 3 days of negotiation and found 8 material alterations, all of them flowing into your personal account." Calloway's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "The word of the child is what gave us the reason to look. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. How many times have we walked past someone, dismissed someone, overlooked someone, because of who they were rather than what they knew? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Carol Watkins found out what happened the same way most people find out about things that involve their children. Her supervisor came to find her in the middle of stripping a bed on the 7th floor and told her, with an expression Carol couldn't quite read, that she needed to come to the executive suite on 4. Now, bring her card if she wanted, but come now. Carol didn't bring the card. She found Darius sitting in a hallway chair outside the conference room, dictionary on his knee, headphones in, looking exactly the way he always looked, unhurried, self-contained, like a kid who had simply been waiting for the next thing. She sat down next to him. She looked at him for a long time. She opened her mouth and closed it again. "What did you do?" she finally said. He told her. All of it. The voices through the door, the columns in the back of the dictionary, Pascal in the break room, the door, the room, the German delegation, the CEO on his knee in the hallway. Carol listened to every word without moving. When he was done, she was quiet for a while. Then she looked at the dictionary in his hands, the one she had paid $3 for, the one with her handwriting still on the inside cover, the one she had bought because she didn't have anything else to give him except the idea that words were doors worth opening. She hadn't known. She had no idea. She had written that inscription in the dark after a double shift, her hand too tired to hold a pen properly, and she had pressed on anyway because he was worth pressing on for. She put her arm around him. She did not say anything about what would happen next. There would be time for that. Time to process the fact that Marcus Calloway had already spoken to hotel management and made clear, in specific terms, that Carol Watkins's position was not only secure, but deserving of recognition. Time to learn that the joint venture, once renegotiated with a legitimate interpreter present, would eventually close, and that a portion of the recovered damages would, through a quiet corporate gesture, establish an educational fund for children of hotel staff. Time to learn that the most powerful man in the building had kneeled in a hallway to look her son in the eye. There would be time for all of it. Right now, she just held him. And Darius, 11 years old, 7 languages, a dictionary held together with a rubber band. Let her. Here is what I keep coming back to when I think about this story. Darius Watkins did not learn languages because someone identified him as exceptional. No talent scout came to his apartment building. No school program flagged him for accelerated learning. He learned because the world his mother's work forced him to live in happened to be full of people speaking things he couldn't ignore. He learned because loneliness can become a gift if you let it drive you toward other people rather than away from them. He walked into that conference room with nothing that the world recognizes as authority. No title, no credentials, no permission. He was a kid in a hoodie whose mother cleaned rooms for a living. And when the woman grabbed his shoulder, when the translator smirked, when the VP didn't look up from his phone, none of it moved him. Because he knew something true, and truth is remarkably difficult to intimidate. The dictionary is still in his pocket. The rubber band is still holding. The inscription inside still reads words or doors. Open every one. And Carol Watkins's son is still opening them. One by one by one. If this story reached something in you, if you felt something watching a boy in a hoodie walk into a room he wasn't supposed to be in and tell a truth nobody was ready to hear, then please take 1 second. Like this video. Subscribe to Untold Maid Confessions. And leave me a comment telling me what part of this story hit you hardest. These are the stories that don't make the news. The people who change rooms, change outcomes, change lives. Often from the service entrance. Often without anyone knowing their name. This channel exists to make sure someone tells their stories. I'm so glad you're here. I'll see you in the next one.